Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a closer look at a recent episode from the Her Take YouTube show. They really tackled some pretty charged issues. Immigration, free speech, cultural flashpoints. It was quite the discussion.
Yeah, it really was. Our source is the transcript, Gay Makeup Artist Deported Borders, Books and Backlash, Her Take Ep 1. And, our goal here isn't just to summarize. We want to dig into the arguments, understand the different perspectives, really get a feel for what these debates are about right now.
Think of it as getting you up to speed without having to sift through everything yourself.
Exactly. A shortcut to being truly informed on these, frankly, complex topics.
Okay, so let's kick things off with immigration. That was a huge chunk of their conversation. They started with the case of Judge Hannah Duggan, arrested for supposedly helping an undocumented immigrant, Eduardo Flores Ruiz, avoid ICE.
Right, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And this Ruiz guy, he wasn't just anyone. He had a warrant for a pretty nasty assault, apparently punched someone 30 times, plus a history of illegal entry.
Yeah. And what jumped out immediately was how differently the hosts reacted. It was quite a contrast.
Oh, definitely. It really shows that core tension, doesn't it? Rule of law versus, I guess, humanitarian angles. One host was just furious, talking about legal immigration, using really strong words like parasite for Ruiz.
Which, yeah, that language itself became a point of contention.
It did. The other host, while agreeing the crime was serious, really pushed back on that word parasite for anyone and questioned, why some on the left might seem to defend someone with that kind of background.
So right away, you see these deeply divided views.
Absolutely. And it led to calls for, better legal paths for immigration, but also sharp criticism for judges acting like, well, the phrase used was vigilante warriors, stepping outside their role.
Then they shifted gears quite a bit to another case. Totally different situation. This gay Venezuelan makeup artist, Christian.
Yeah, Christian's story. It's kind of heartbreaking, honestly. It really highlights the human cost when bureaucracy messes up or when policies are maybe too blunt.
So what happened there?
Well, he was seeking asylum legally, fleeing persecution in Venezuela because he's gay. But he got deported anyway to El Salvador, of all places, because someone misinterpreted his tattoos as gang signs.
Wow. So he was following the process.
Trying to. And one of the Her Take hosts pointed to this as a potential consequence, a mistake stemming from the Trump administration's push for faster deportations. It just makes you think about the individual stories lost in these big policy debates,
It really does. And it challenges that simple narrative, doesn't it? Here's someone actively seeking legal protection, not sneaking in, and he ends up in this terrible situation because of, well, what sounds like a mistake.
Exactly. And it brought up a really fundamental question from one of the hosts. What is America's responsibility exactly when it comes to granting asylum? Where do we draw the line?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Pretty much. And it flowed into this discussion about the difference between legal and illegal immigration. One host, who's a naturalized immigrant herself, talked about how insulting she finds illegal immigration.
Why insulting?
Because her family spent years going through the legal hoops, playing by the rules, contributing. It just highlights that even within the immigrant community, there are really different takes on this.
That personal angle adds a lot of weight.
Yeah.
They also got into the economics, right?
Yeah, the argument that legal immigration often boosts the economy, brings in skills, starts businesses, contrasted with concerns that large-scale illegal immigration might depress wages for low-skilled workers or strain public services.
And California came up?
Specifically, the policy of providing state-funded health care to undocumented immigrants. The costs, the financial implications, that was definitely part of the conversation.
So you see how it all connects: border, asylum, economics, state policies.
It's all tangled up. And that failed bipartisan border bill got a mention, too. There was some, let's say, skepticism voiced on the show about whether the Biden administration really wanted reform or if they only acted when it became, a political problem.
Right. Was it genuine or just managing optics? That highlights the whole tussle between what the president can do versus what Congress needs to legislate on immigration. A constant back and forth.
Yeah. And then the conversation took a pretty sharp turn into the Great Replacement theory.
Okay, tread carefully here. This is a really controversial one.
Extremely. The theory basically is this idea that Democrats are intentionally using immigration to, import voters and change the electorate for political gain.
And how did the Her Take hosts handle that?
They pushed back hard. pointed out there's just no real evidence of widespread voting by non-citizens. And they raised counterpoints, like the fact that many immigrant communities are actually pretty socially conservative, so they wouldn't automatically vote Democrat anyway.
So, presenting it as a theory being discussed, but one lacking factual support.
Exactly. It's an inflammatory idea floating around, but the discussion fact-checked it. They also touched briefly on the census, the debate about whether counting undocumented immigrants shifts congressional seats, and the different motivations people might have for supporting or opposing that count.
Wow. So yeah, the immigration segment alone covered a huge range.
Yeah.
Individual stories, big policy debates, economic impacts, even conspiracy theories.
It really did, which kind of sets the stage for the next big topic they tackled, free speech and some of these cultural issues, just as complex, just as many viewpoints.
Right. The complexity doesn't stop. So where did they start with free speech?
They kicked off with the case of Mahmoud Khalil. He's a student here on a visa who might be removed, deported because of things he allegedly posted online showing support for Hamas.
Support like how?
Well, specifically a tribute he apparently wrote on a CU Aid Substack that's like a blog linked to the University of Colorado, Denver, praising a figure connected to the October 7th attacks.
Okay, so that immediately sparks the free speech debate.
Right.
Especially for someone who isn't a U.S. citizen.
Exactly. One side argued, pretty strongly on her take, that even non-citizens have First Amendment protections for their speech. But others countered that there have to be limits, especially if the speech seems to support terrorist groups.
Was there any evidence mentioned that he actually, gave money or directly told people to commit violence?
No, that wasn't mentioned in the discussion points we have. No talk of material support or direct incitement. Which makes that line even harder to draw, doesn't it? Where does expressing a controversial opinion, even a repugnant one, cross into something else?
Yeah, what's the threshold for speech that could actually get you deported? That's a huge question.
Huge. And concerns were definitely raised about setting a precedent. Could this lead to policing speech more broadly? Could it be abused down the line? Someone even brought up the KKK, how generally, even their hateful speech is protected unless it directly incites violence.
It's that classic free speech dilemma. Where's the line? They also talked about vetting immigrants, right? Like, should their beliefs be screened?
Yeah, that came up too. Should someone's ideology be a factor in whether they can come here or stay here legally? It's all part of that balancing act between rights and security.
A very tricky balance.
Yeah.
The conversation then moved quite naturally, I think, to distinguishing between anti-Semitism and just criticizing the Israeli government.
Which is such a critical distinction and one that gets blurred way too often. The hosts were really clear. Criticizing Israeli government policies is not the same thing as being anti-Semitic.
Did they give examples?
Yeah, they pointed out that many Jewish people themselves are very critical of Israeli policies. And they were also explicit in condemning Hamas's actions and wanting Hamas defeated. So making that separation, you can criticize a government without hating a people.
That's vital for any kind of reasonable discussion on the topic, isn't it?
Absolutely. You have to be able to talk about policy without it instantly becoming accusations of bigotry.
Okay, so after that, they dove into another really, really hot topic. Parental rights in schools. Specifically, this Mahmoud v. Taylor case.
Right. This involves families, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, who want to be able to opt their young kids out of lessons or readings involving LGBTQ plus inclusive books in pre-K and elementary school.
Which books were mentioned?
Titles like Pride Puppy, Uncle Bobby's Wedding, Intersection Allies, My Rainbow, Princeton Night. The parents' argument, basically, is that they have the right to decide when and how their children are introduced to these topics, especially if it conflicts with their religious beliefs.
It's that fundamental question again. Who's primarily in charge of a child's upbringing on sensitive issues, parents or the school?
Exactly. And there was this interesting wrinkle about how the school district classified the books. Apparently, they put them under literature, not health.
And why does that matter?
Well, health classes often have clear opt-out rules. Some, on her take, wondered if calling it literature was a way to sort of get around those parental opt-out rights. And then the debate got really specific about age appropriateness. Are these themes suitable for 4th and 5th graders or even younger?
Were there specific examples that caused concern?
Yeah, a couple were highlighted that really fueled the debate. One was a character described as having pronouns that change like the weather. Another was a supposed 2nd grade activity involving vocabulary like drag queen and leather underwear.
Wait, for second graders?
That was the claim discussed. It obviously raised eyebrows and led to intense discussion about what's appropriate for 7 or 8-year-olds versus maybe older kids.
I can imagine. It hits that nerve about protecting childhood innocence versus preparing kids for the world.
For sure. And one host brought up the idea of social contagion, referencing the big jump in Gen Z identifying as LGBTQ plus S layer and questioning if school materials play a role. It's a controversial idea, but it was part of their discussion.
So what's the legal basis for the parents' case?
It boils down to accommodating sincerely held religious beliefs, a cornerstone of constitutional law. The parents were apparently saying, we don't want to ban these books for everyone, just let our kids opt out.
But what's the counter-argument to letting them opt out?
The concern voiced by others was that if you let kids opt out of learning about different kinds of families or identities, it could lead to more othering, more prejudice down the line because of lack of exposure.
But couldn't parents still talk about it at home?
That was the counter-argument, basically. Parents can still teach their values at home, regardless of what's taught in school. It just shows the deep disagreement about the school's role versus the parents' role.
It feels like these culture war battles sometimes overshadow basic academics too, doesn't it?
That came up too. They briefly mentioned other education issues in California, tons of missed school days because of weather or infrastructure problems, and the pandemic's impact, like kids struggling with social cues now, spending more time online.
So it's all happening against this backdrop of other challenges in education.
Exactly. And from parental rights, the conversation kind of zoomed out to identity politics more broadly, particularly within the Democratic Party.
What was the critique there?
Some felt there's too much focus now on dividing people into identity groups rather than emphasizing a shared American identity. One host shared feeling pigeonholed by ethnicity at political events, wanting to be seen as an individual first.
Wanting unity over division.
Yeah, contrasting it with maybe the Gen X attitude, sometimes called the love is love generation, which felt more unifying. And then they got into the LGBTQ plus acronym itself.
Oh boy. What about it?
Just the fact that it keeps expanding, concerns were raised, does adding more and more letters make it confusing? Does it risk becoming meaningless or even excluding some people unintentionally?
Interesting point. And did they connect this back to party politics?
Yes, the idea was floated that maybe the Democratic Party has shifted focus from, say, traditional working class concerns towards prioritizing some of these cultural issues.
Which is a debate happening in real time, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? They wrapped up with something called the woke right.
Yeah, this was referencing Jordan Peterson's theory. It's a bit academic, maybe. His idea, as explained on the show, is that some people on the right might adopt certain ideologies not out of conviction, but more opportunistically.
How so?
Peterson links it to certain personality traits. Cluster B, dark tetrad stuff, basically characteristics like narcissism, manipulativeness. The theory is these individuals might latch on to an ideology, left or right, just as a vehicle for gaining power or attention.
Okay, that's a specific theory. Did they connect it to anyone?
The discussion touched on controversies around figures like Daryl Cooper, who does historical content, and accusations of anti-Semitism regarding his work on Israel.
So applying the theory to real people.
Well, there was also pushback, defending Cooper's work as nuanced history, criticizing attempts to deplatform people, and a distinction was made. Peterson's woke right theory is different from just, right-wing cancel culture or gatekeeping within the movement.
Right, two different meanings of a similar phrase.
Exactly, and one host even shared a personal story about getting flack from right-wing circles after she left the Democratic Party, just showing that, intolerance isn't exclusive to one side.
No kidding. So, wow. That one Her Take episode really went everywhere, didn't it? Immigration law, asylum seekers, free speech for non-citizens, anti-Semitism, LGBTQ plus books in schools, identity politics, niche academic theories.
It really covered the gamut. It just hammers home how incredibly complex and, frankly, how emotional these issues are right now. We heard arguments about who belongs, the limits of free speech, the role of parents, what it even means to be American today. So many competing values.
It gives you a ton to think about, that's for sure. So maybe the final thought to leave you, the listener, with is this. In such a polarized climate, with these incredibly deep disagreements we just heard about, how do we even begin to talk to each other productively? How can people find any common ground, or at least respectful dialogue, when the divisions seem so stark?
Yeah, that feels like the question right now, doesn't it?